Right. So in React, there is a term called UseEffect, and like we in the last video we have seen like what a use state is. So use state was basically a hook that we use to store the data in which our app somehow has to react, right? So for example, if I had a data and when I update the data, I want my app to reload or to consume those changes, right? So now talking about use effect. Okay, so use effect, what a use effect does is basically similar, or I would say the same as like we have like we have lifecycle method in class-based components. Okay, so in functional components we don't have lifecycle methods, so we only have one method called as use effect, and which is a hook, right? So use effect can do all those things which lifecycle method. There are multiple lifecycle methods in class-based components, and but in in functional component we only have one hook to manage all those things, and that is use effect. So now let's see how we can use effect. All right, so before diving deep into how we can use effect, so let's see like what actually use effect does and how it reacts. Okay, so use effect is basically, as you can see, as you can tell by the name, it's use effect basically means that it will react, or it will show the effect of some reaction. Okay, so for example, if I do some changes in my app, then my app has to react in some way. All right, so basically my use effect is more or like a function, right? So basically it takes two arguments, and the first one is a method itself, and the second one we'll talk about it later, right? Okay, so my use effect hook will run only only one of the three times. Okay, so we have three scenarios in which my use effect method will run, and the first one is when my component is rendered for the first time. Okay, so for example, when you go to localhost 3000 and you render your app, okay, so when you hit run, so that is the first time my app is running, and that will be the very first time my use effect will run. That is the first thing, right? And for the second case, now the second option is, first one is like for the first time when my app is rendering, and second one is when something changes, right? When something changes, and something changes mean when my app re-renders, right? Re-rendering mean when my app is somehow reloading itself. Okay, so that is the second time when my use effect will run, right? Now the third one is like the first two options, like when my app is being loaded for the first time or it's rendering for the first time. The second one is like when there is some changes in the app and an app is re-rendering itself, and the third one is when my data changes, and in other word, or in more precise word, when my state changes, right? So when my state will change, and when something will happen, like for example, when my uh, app is re-rendering itself, then my use effect will run, and when my app is being rendering for the first time. Okay, so these are the three cases when my use effect will run. Okay, now let's jump into the code editor, and let's see how it works out. All right, so now you can see I'm in my code editor, and now let's implement use effect, right? So to implement use effect, what we have to do first is will have to import use effect from what this does now. Will have to import use effect from React, right? Okay, so now you can see so the use effect basically takes two argument. The first one is a function, right, and the second one is basically array of dependencies, or you can leave it empty, right? So I'll tell you what is the difference between leaving it empty and passing an array, right? So the idea is we are going to make a network call uh, in our use effect, right? So why we are doing it? Because use effect will be the first function which executes itself when our app renders, right? Okay, so first of all, let me console.log. Now you can see in the console, you guys can see that it says rendered, right? Okay, so now what we are going to do is, so we are going to make a network call to this API, which is json placeholder.ipcode.com. Okay, so let me copy this, and I'm going to use fetch, and inside fetch I'm going to pass this, and this will return me a response. Okay, and now let me just console.log what the response is. Oh, so there's a typo, sorry for that. Now let me open my, you can see that it returns a promise, and the promise is pending, and you can see in the network call I have a request which is for to-dos, right? So if I do it this way, then you can see all I print is a promise, and that is not what I want, right? What I want is it to return me a list of to-dos, right? So to achieve that, what we can do is we'll have to use some asynchronous functionality which JavaScript provides us. So for that to achieve, let me do one thing, which is okay, I'm going to define a function. Okay, let me first clear this. So what we're going to do, we are going to create a function called fetch to-dos, and which will be asynchronous, right? And inside this I'll call my response as response, and it will call the fetch API, my fetch API. Alright, but it will be an await. Okay, so I'll have to give the keyword await. That's why my response will wait for my fetch to execute, to get the response of this API. And now after that I can simply console.log my response. Okay, now if I save it, you can see in my console, if I refresh it, nothing prints because funny, I haven't executed it, so I'll have to call this function. Now you'll see that my response, okay, so this is my response. In the network tab you can see the to-dos and what it gets me. Okay, that's the same thing, but in my response, if you go and body use status 200 type URL, now what we'll do is, you can see that my response, I have the response which is this, right? Okay, so we have to basically convert it into a JSON formats, and the way we do it, we cannot just simply write this, because what will happen then is basically this is not the time when we have the response, right? So basically, because we're using await with the fetch, we'll have to use let me define a constant call as data, and then I will await my response dot JSON. Right now I have data, so I can console.log data. Right, so now I can see, if I refresh it, now you can see I have a list of wow, this is a huge list. So I can see I have a list of to-dos where I have user ID, title, and a flag call completed and not completed, right? So yeah, so I have data. So now what I can do is I can somehow just render my data inside this. So I need to populate this data. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to somehow render my list of to-dos, into the DOM or into my web page, right? So now you can see I only have a button, but I need a div. Okay, and inside the div I want all my to-dos, right? Somehow my to-dos to be in here. Okay, so what I want to do is like I have my entire string or entire array in this data object, right? Okay, oh sorry. Okay, so inside my data object you can see this is my data being printed out, and this is an array, right? So what I want is when I have the data, I want to store it, okay? Because this is not storing data, this is just somehow holding it for some time, okay? And to store it permanently in this component, you know what we have to do is, right, we will create a state, right? Okay, so I'll call this to-dos because it will be a list of to-dos. In case you don't know what use state is or state is, you need to check out my previous video, which I'll probably link down in the description, or you'll see an I button. Okay, now I have imported use state, and I'll initialize this to-dos as an array because I'm going to use map method on it, right? So you can see this is an array, so I will initialize it with an empty array, right? And what I want after this console log is that I want to call this setter function, which is set to dos, and I want my data to be my to do, right? Alright, so this looks good. Now what I want to do, okay, I'm removing the console log. Okay, let's keep it there, right? Now what I want to do is inside this div I will create another div, and inside I have curly braces, and then I have my to-dos, and I'm going to call map function on it, and I'll call this as to do. Okay, so what I want to do, I will return paragraph. Inside paragraph you can see like I have my, okay, inside this you can see that I have title, right? So all I have is title. Okay, so I want to print my to-dos dot title. So to do, not to do's dot title. Okay, so let's hope it works. When I can see on the right side I have a list of to-dos. If I refresh this, whoa, you can see the number of time it's being printed out, right? Okay, and you can see there is a warning, which is each child in the list should have a unique key prop. I know what is this. Okay, so what I'll do is I will make another. Okay, if you don't know how to use map, so map basically, it's a method which is only for the arrays, and the first one is the element inside the array, which is the object, right? And the object has a property title, right? And then the second argument is the index, right? And I can use my index as a key prop. So key is basically how React differentiates between the child which are generated dynamically or hard coded, which are hard coded basically. So now it shouldn't give any warning, but you can see the problem is that initially it was rendering only 1 or 2 times, but now it has like multiple. Now it is rendering multiple time, and the reason for this is because we are setting a state here. Okay, so now if you remember the third reason which I gave to when use state runs is the time when you update a state. Okay, so at this line we are updating to do state, right? And this is important. Okay, so and you can also see if I remove this, and it will all go away. You can see that's only rendering 2 times, and so this is the reason why. Okay, so that was the first thing. Okay, I did not pass any dependency, if you didn't notice. So if I pass the dependency, which is the empty square brackets, which means that now it will only run for the first time. Now you can see it is only running the first time. Okay, so let me make uh, so when it's empty, which means it will run every time when the app re-renders itself. Cool. And when we have like this guy, it will run, sorry, it will run only the first time. Now the third case. Okay, so the third case is when we actually pass something in it. All right, so something can be when, so when's the time when it will run. So I can pass to do when my to do's update, when my this thing updates. Okay, so the initial value of to do's is an empty array, but what I'm saying is when my to do's update, then only then only run the use effect. Okay, so when I pass something which is, you know, something, only run it then. Alright, so now if I run it, I can see it is printing multiple times, and the reason why, because my to-dos are updating itself, right? That is the reason why this is wow, you can see that it is rendering like thousands of times. Okay, so let me remove this because this is not right. Okay, now what I want to do, okay, so now what I want to do is I want to trigger this action, which is the fetching of these to-dos. Oh, now you can see how many network calls are we making. So you can see that this is absolutely not very performance efficient. And oh wow. All right, so first of all let me remove this because this is like very bad for our. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to trigger this action, which is fetching of the to-dos from this JSON placeholder API, is only happen when I click on this call an API. And not only that, so what so after click an API, call an API, when I'll click on it, it will fetch the to-do list, and when I again click on it, it will basically make it empty, right? Alright, so how we can do is, so first of all, like you guys have guessed, which you will have to attach an on click on it, and I'll call this on click, sorry for that, on click handler, right? So my on click handler will be an arrow function which will take nothing as an argument, right? Alright, so nothing much. Okay, so what I want to do is when I click on this on click, what I want to do, okay, let me first define a state, because I'll call the state as is fetching, because this will basically trigger my fetching of to-do list. Is fetching, and I will make it as, it will be a boolean, so initially it will be false, but what I'll do is when I click on this, if the user clicks on this, I will basically set my is fetching to be true, right? And I will call my fetch to do function only when my is fetching is true. So now if I refresh it, it won't do anything, but when I click on it, it doesn't do anything, and the reason why it does not do anything is because I have to pass it like this. Oh, sorry. Did I miss something? Fast on click handler set is fetching true. If is fetching did I do something? So I find the mistake. The mistake is because this is why the reason why it's not running is because you can see if I print something in here which is like inside, let's say, so what will happen if I refresh it? You say it says inside, but it is not fetching an API, and the reason why, it's because I don't have any dependency here. So I need to add is fetching, because whenever is fetching changes, I want my use effect to do something, right? Now if I run on it, you can see that my list is there now. Okay, and there is only one API call, which is absolutely great. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want my is fetching. Okay, so whenever is fetching is true, it will fetch the API. It will fetch my to-dos. But what I want to do is on click handler, if right, so I'm not going to turn it to. What I want to do is kind of toggle it. So okay, whenever someone's click it twice on it, or if I click again on it, what I want to do is to remove all those things, right? So how I can do it is I can use I can convert this into a function, an arrow function, and I will basically reverse it. Okay, so now you can see if I'm calling an API. Okay, so it's basically doing it, but the reason why it's not happening is because the data is already being set. So my to-dos actually store everything. So what I want to do, else set to-dos to make an empty array. And now if you see, if I click on this again, it stops fetching an API. And how cool is that, right? Alright guys, thank you so much for watching the video, and if you really find it very helpful, then please consider subscribing my channel, and if you have any doubt, you can post it in the comment and I'll try to answer it.